Welcome to another podcast. Thanks for joining us, and let us begin.
What are we looking at here, Mr. Manley?
This is no meteor. This is something much more serious.
Invaders from Mars.
Hey there, Scout. Kent Mansley.
You work for the government.
I have something for you.
Where did you find that?
Up at the power station.
Hogarth was out there the other night.
Really? See anything unusual, Hogarth?
Thing unusual, really.
Yes, that was part of the trailer to The Iron Giant. This movie is one of my all-time favourite movies. It's actually my top 10 of all-time favourite movie. It really pulls on the heartstrings and also has some small laughs in there too. This movie came out in 1999. It was directed by Brad Bird. You may have seen some of his films, The Incredibles 2, Ratatouille, and one of the Mission Impossible films, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is one of my favourite Mission Impossible films. Now, I mentioned this film was released in 1999. It was released around the same time as The Sixth Sense. The movie grossed approximately $30 million off a $70 million budget. However, since it didn't do that well at its theoretical run, it has become quite of a bit of a cult classic. It has gathered quite a fan base. The robot design is done by Joe Johnston, which I think is just, the robot design, the Iron Giant design is just awesome. So much so, I have an Iron Giant statue in my lounge room. And you're probably wondering, who's Joe Johnston? Well, he used to work in special effects, I believe. I could have that information wrong, but I believed he worked in special effects and then went into directing movies. And some of his movies you may have seen: Jurassic Park 3, The Wolfman, Jumanji. However, probably the most popular is Captain America, the First Avenger. Now, Iron Giant. The stars in this movie, the voice actors: Jennifer Anderson, you probably know her from Friends. You have Harriet Connick Jr., you may know some of his songs. Fast and the Furious himself, Vin Diesel. Now, the movie is set in the late 50s. I actually thought it was in the early 60s, but it's actually set in the late 50s. And in real life, in the 50s and 60s, that's when the Great Space Race was on. Now, the plot to this movie: a young boy basically befriends a giant robot from outer space, and reports of happenings in the town leads to a paranoid government agent to investigate. And later, he will do basically anything to destroy this robot. And our movie starts with the Iron Giant coming from outer space and landing in the ocean outside of Maine. And that's the town where the movie is set. Now, the animation to this movie. Now, if you remember the Warner Brothers animated cartoons back in the day, like Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, it's kind of got the same animation style. It's got that classic look to it. The actors do a great job with the voice acting, and they're all great performances. The standout for me is Christopher McDonald.
Let's put it this way. Every once in a while, things happen that just can't be rationalized in a conventional way. People want to know that their government has a response. I am that response.
Now, you may remember Christopher McDonald from the movie Happy Gilmore, who he plays Shooter McGavin. He does a great job in this movie. He plays the paranoid government agent who's sent to investigate the reports of an invader from Mars and the missing metal parts gone from around the town. So I'm going to go into the story details now, and there are going to be spoilers. I just wanted to mention that. So we have Hogarth, played by Eli Marienthal. I hope I'm not mispronouncing his last name. My dyslexia sometimes doesn't help, so I apologize there. When they started filming this film, he was 11, and when they finished the film, he was 13, and he did an amazing job.
Shut off, Switch. You saw me save you.
His character befriends the Iron Giant, played by Vin Diesel. Now, the Iron Giant has around about 50 to 53 words in the whole film. Anyway, Hogarth and his mum, you get very early on that Hogarth is used to looking after himself at times, as his mum may have to work a double shift. Now, Hogarth's mum is played by Jennifer Anderson, as I might have mentioned, and she does a great job also.
My son is out there! We've got to help him, Hogarth!
Hogarth is an independent kid who sticks up for himself, and he's also quite smart. You're not going to pull the wool over his eyes at all. So when he befriends this Iron Giant, straight away he knows, I've got my own Iron Giant. I've got this big robot that's my friend, and hold on, I've got to keep this to myself, because he realizes his surroundings. It's a space race going on. There's Sputnik at the time. Heightened tension around at the moment. So he realizes not to tell anyone, because if someone sees this robot, they're just going to come shooting and freak out. So I love that about the film. He keeps it himself. He's this kid that's totally aware of his surroundings, and he's just going to befriend this robot. This robot, the Iron Giant, has this innocence about him, and he realizes Hogarth has just saved his life, because early in the film, the Iron Giant, now I mentioned the plot that he's eating metal.
Kid was bitten off by some enormous beast.
Enormous beast. Yeah, what do you think? Escaped gorilla?
And car parts, and people are reporting this happening. So he's got an appetite. That's how he keeps his energy levels up, by eating metal. And he goes to one of the power stations and gets electrocuted. And this is where Hogarth sees him. Now, Hogarth's about to run away and leave this giant. He's freaking out, thinking, oh my goodness, what is that? What's going on? But this is where the movie essentially starts. Hogarth can hear the pain in the giant's voice. He realizes he's actually going to die. Hogarth runs up and turns off the mains and saves the Iron Giant. And the Iron Giant is aware of this.
Shut off, Switch. You saw me save you.
And when they meet again in the forest, basically they befriend each other, and this is where, as I mentioned, the movie really starts to kick off.
Kent Mansley, work for the government? Let's put it this way. Every once in a while, things happen that just can't be rationalized in a conventional way. People want to know that their government has a response. I am that response. So, were there any witnesses?
Yes, Kent Mansley, I work for the government. Kent Mansley sent in to investigate these reports, and at first he's quite skeptical. Aliens landing from out of space into the sea, and one of his first investigations, I believe it's one of his first, is the power station. And Marv is telling him it was almost like it was bitten off.
Kid was bitten off.
And Kent Mansley is not really having a bar of it.
Enormous beast. Yeah, what do you think? Escaped gorilla?
He's not really interested. But it's not until Kent Mansley goes back to his car.
Come around the corner. Come on, pick up the pace here. Okay?
Hard, Mr.
I've never seen
Manley.
anything like it. It's like a big chomp out of the side of the
Take
car.
it
It's
easy.
like a bite out of a ham sandwich. Like a...
And half of his car is missing, like it's been bitten off, similar to the power station. Straight away, Kent Mansley goes from being a skeptic to becoming a believer. Once we experience something ourselves and we see it with our own eyes, straight away you're going to change your attitude, and he's on board now and tells Marv, well, this is what he says.
What are we looking at here, Mr. Manley?
Something big, Marv. Something big.
Yes, something very big. And he's going to do whatever he can to investigate this, because he's that kind of agent. He's paranoid now. He wants to know who sent it, and he's going to do his best to find out what's going on. So now we have Dean McCoppin, played by Harrick Connick Jr. Now, he also does a great job. I know I mentioned earlier everyone does a great job with their performance and the voice acting, and that's fantastic, and it's great direction and well done by all the actors involved, because it really just, the performances in this movie are just fantastic. Now, he plays Dean McCoppin, as I mentioned, who owns McCoppin Metal Scrapyard, and his character is quite a cool cat. You know, he's the 60s kind of rock and roll. If you ever saw Happy Days, that show back, well, geez, I remember watching it in the 80s on TV, but he kind of plays that, the Fonz kind of character. He's a cool, calm, collected guy. Anyway, Hogarth, I mentioned Hogarth's quite a smart kid. He takes the Iron Giant to McCoppin Metal Scrapyard, because he basically caught on that, hey, you just can't go eating or people's cars. It's going to draw even more attention. So he takes him to McCoppin Scrapyard, junkyard, where Dean, he uses all this scrap metal to make art out of it, and he sells his metal art to people. However, Hogarth and the Iron Giant aren't that quiet when the Iron Giant is having basically a buffet of metal, and Dean sees the Iron Giant, comes outside, sees the Iron Giant, freaks out as you would, and tries to grab Hogarth and run. The Iron Giant straight away is looking after Hogarth, stops Dean, and Hogarth tells Dean it's okay, he's our friend, he's not going to hurt us.
His name is Dean. We like Dean.
Dean.
And Dean's like, right, okay. You know, he's playing along at the moment, but also realizes he's not going to be hurt. And Hogarth, it's one of the funniest bits in the movie for me, asks Dean, look, he needs a place to stay. The Iron Giant needs a place to stay, so can he stay here? And Dean just stands up, gives him like a deer in the headlight kind of look, like pours his coffee out and walks off. It's hilarious. The animation is, I found it hilarious, and just walks off like, are you shitting me? No, he's not going to stay here, and just walks off. Anyway, I forget the timeline. I don't know if it was 10, 15 minutes later, Hogarth is banging on the door saying, I can make him break the door down. And he goes, yeah, sure, whatever, make him, you know, Dean just wants to get to sleep. He's like, whatever, he'll just do whatever, just to have Hogarth go home, and the Iron Giant sleeps. And it's where you find out basically the Iron Giant, Hogarth and him, it's a little bit of an important bit of the film that he's got feelings. So since you've got feelings, you have a soul. He says that to the Iron Giant. So it's quite a sweet little moment. Hogarth goes home, and Kent Mansley's on the case. And I have skipped a bit forward here but I don't want to give everything away. And basically Kent Mansley is basically inquiring about what Hogarth was doing up at the power station the other day, because, hey, he has his air rifle.
I have something for you.
Where did you find that?
Up at the power station.
Hogarth was out there the other night.
He has a bit of evidence. And he asks Hogarth, did you see anything unusual the other night, Hogarth? Now, when Kent Mansley leaves Hogarth and his mum's house, you'll see in the background that it says room for rent. Now, later in the movie, Kent Mansley's gonna, pull another ace out of his sleeve and basically rent that room out so he can get more information out of Hogarth.
Kent Mansley, work for the government?
So we have this kid trying to keep his big secret under his hat. Kent Mansley's hot on the case, and it's a little bit, just a tiny bit of, bit of give and take of, seeing where Hogarth is seeing where Kent Mansley's at, and Kent Mansley's constantly, like, he's not doing it in a subtle way at all. He's just coming out, with all the questions to Hogarth, and Hogarth has just had enough. So he's like, I'm going out. I don't want to have any. I need to get out of the house. You're driving me crazy. And there's a brilliant scene where he takes, his mum actually says to Hogarth, well, why don't you take Kent with you? And Hogarth is like, oh, Mum, why are you doing this to me? And in the meantime, Dean is got this giant robot at his house, and he's like, what the heck? What? I forgot that you were here. It's all quite hilarious. And Hogarth, I won't say what happens when he goes out with Kent Mansley, because it is a little amusing, but I'm going to actually stop telling you what happens in the movie from here on in, because I just think it's such a classic movie. As I said, it pulls on the heartstrings. The Iron Giant, designed by Joe Johnston, is just fantastic. And I know I keep going on about the voice acting, but Brad Bird's direction in this film is just great. And you can tell that because look at his other films, The Incredibles 2, his live action feature, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol. And when I watch The Iron Giant, it's one of those feel-good movies, and I leave with a warm, fuzzy feeling. And I like that. I like leaving a film going, you know what? And the other thing, it has rewatchability to it. And I've watched it numerous times. I'm going to go back and watch it. I haven't seen it for a couple of years now, probably even maybe half a decade. And I'm going to go back and watch it. It's one of my favorite movies. I've watched it with my kids. So I want you to do yourself a favor, and I don't want to give too much away, because if I give too much away and give you the whole plot details of everything scene by scene, when you watch it, nothing's going to be... I gave a little bit of spoilers, but I want you to discover this movie for yourself. And I know it's an animated film, and some people go, oh, I'm not watching an animated film, but I think this one, for me, it's just... it's dear to my heart. I think it's an awesome film. It made me laugh, and it's just got that 50s, 60s tension there where we're trying to discover things during that period, and people's imaginations were probably going a bit wild at that time, and then it's worth a watch if you can hire it or watch it on Netflix. It's a Warner Brothers film. When you watch Ready Player One, if you've ever seen Ready Player One, this is where the Iron Giant came from, this movie. And if you haven't seen Ready Player One, go watch Ready Player One too. That's such a favorite, one of my favorite science fiction movies of all time. I should actually do my top 10 science fiction movies, or top 5 science fiction movies. I know I did a podcast on my favorite 80s science fiction films. I should do overall my favorite science fiction movies, because The Iron Giant and Ready Player One is in there, and they're there to entertain me. And if they do that, that's awesome. Yeah, there's some movies that I thought were horrendous, but definitely not The Iron Giant. So if you get a chance, watch it. As I said, it's one of my favorite films. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this. Well, it wasn't a very long podcast, but thank you for joining me. I hope to was doing a podcast with the Frog. We were doing the Terminator series. Unfortunately, which is just so unfortunate, the file got corrupt. We did an hour and 15 minutes of recording, and when I went to retrieve the file, or even just double click on the file to edit it, it wouldn't open. It got corrupt, and I tried to do it. For someone who used to work in IT, Anyway, there was no chance of me getting that file back. I let the Frog know, so hopefully we can do a re-record on that. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Help the channel grow by subscribing. I'm putting this on YouTube and Apple Podcast. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Giant.